I'd like to start with a story about the sweater rule. I was shopping for a sweater, one that matched a certain outfit in just the right shade, ideally on sale. And there it was, perfect. Dude, as I held it, I couldn't stop myself. I thought, is there something better, something more flattering or more exciting? I put it back. The story stayed open another day or two, and by the time I realized that the sweater was right there all along, it was gone. I was left with nothing. That's our dating life sometimes. So convinced there are infinite better out there, we risk the good available person standing right in front of us. What made me think of that sweater was a relationship question someone asked recently. How do I make a woman choose me? Especially if she has other options. At first, my gut reaction, my therapist's gut was toggle into the premise because when someone says, how do I make her choose me? I'm thinking that's about control, not connection. Real choice only happens within freedom, but let's go deeper. Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone you like, maybe on a date, maybe in the quiet living room of a relationship that's been around for years, and you'll catch yourself in a moment of hesitation. You're nodding, you're smiling, you're listening. But in the back of your mind, there's a running commentary that you're not even fully aware of. Something like, I'm too much. Or, if I say this, they'll leave. Or, this is going to end like everything else. That's your story speaking, not the truth of the moment. And the thing is, most of us don't realize that we're carrying those old narratives into every interaction. They become the invisible lens we use to interpret everything. Radical self-awareness begins with noticing that lens, holding it up to the light and asking, is this actually reality, or is it just the story I've been telling myself? The problem isn't that we have stories. We all do. They help us make sense of the world. The problem is when we realize the story has become the driver, and we're sitting in the passenger seat of our own lives. Think of a person who always says, people leave me. That's not just a line. It's a belief that informs every text they send, every silence they fill, every look they interpret. If the person they're dating takes 2 hours to the psychology of choice and attraction respite to a message, the story whispers, see, they're losing interest just like always. And suddenly they're pulling away preemptively or overcompensating by clinging. The other person feels this shift, gets confused, maybe backs away, and the story gets confirmed. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Without radical self-awareness, we confuse the echo of the past with the voice of the present. So how do you rewrite the story? You start by slowing down and naming it. Sometimes I'll tell people in therapy to pause and ask, what's the story I'm telling myself right now? It sounds almost too simple, but it's revolutionary because if you don't name a story, you're trapped inside it. Maybe the story is I'm not enough. Maybe it's I have to be perfect to be loved. Maybe it's if I show who I really am, people will run. And once you hear that story out loud, you can start to recognize how often it shows up in your life, how it drives your choices, and how it limits what's possible. Radical self-awareness isn't about judging the story. It's about noticing it and then gently asking, is this true or is this old? Here's the irony. The stories we cling to most tightly are usually the ones that hurt us the most. Why? Because they're familiar. Because we know how to serve in them. If you grew up feeling unseen, the story might be, I don't deserve attention. And then in adult relationships, you might choose partners who don't give you much attention because it feels like home. You tell yourself, this is just how love feels. And when someone finally does show up fully and consistently, it can feel foreign, even uncomfortable. You might think, what's wrong with them that they like me this much? Or worse, this isn't passion, this is boring. That's how powerful the story is. It tells you what's normal, even if normal is painful. Narrative clarity means recognizing That familiarity is not the same as truth, and comfort is not the same as love. It's asking yourself, what story am I replaying here? And more importantly, do I want to keep living this one? Because the beauty of being human is that we can revise the draft. We can look back at the story and see where it came from, how it served us at one time, and then decide it doesn't serve us anymore. Maybe I'm unlovable prodded you once when the people around you couldn't meet your needs because it helped you make sense of their failures. But today, that same story only keeps you from letting in the love that is right there available, waiting for you to notice. The tricky part is that radical self-awareness asks you to step into discomfort. It asks you to sit with feelings you'd rather avoid. Shame, grief, fear, and to notice where they come from. That's why so many people resist it. It's easier to distract ourselves, to blame the other person, to chase the next high of attention or validation. But here's the truth. Until you understand the story you're carrying, you can't understand why you keep ending up in the same place. You'll think it's just bad luck or that you're attracting the wrong people when really you've been unconsciously recreating what you already know. It's not fate, it's repetition. I once worked with someone who always said, nobody ever chooses me. They believed they were destined to be second place, the backup, the almost, what makes one man stand out. But when we unpacked their relationships, a pattern emerged. They often chose people who were emotional unable, already in relationships, ambivalent, or simply not ready. Why? Because if the other person couldn't fully choose them, then they wouldn't have to face the deeper fear that if Somioni could fully choose them, maybe they wouldn't be good enough. Their story was safer than their hope. Bacho stories work. They keep us safe from the risk of disappointment by guaranteeing the outcome in advance. Radical self-awareness means you no longer accept that guarantee. You begin to see the story as just that, a story, not destiny. And then comes the hardest part. You live differently. You start to show up with honesty. You say what you want without apologizing. You don't contort yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You tolerate the silence that comes after you speak your truth. You risk being seen. And in that risk, you give someone the opportunity to choose the real you, not the version you think you have to be. That's the essence of narrative clarity. You know which parts are fiction, and you step into the reality that feels scarier but truer. But let's be clear, rewriting your story doesn't mean everything suddenly goes smoothly. You will still get rejected. You will still feel vulnerable. You will still question yourself. The difference is rejection no longer confirms your old story. Instead, it becomes data. You can say, this person didn't choose me, and that's about fit, not worth. That's a huge shift because when you're stuck in the old story, every rejection feels like proof. When you've cultivated self-awareness, rejection feels like clarity. And clarity is what frees you to move forward instead of circling back. Here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to control someone else's choice is the moment you become most powerful in your own. When you know your story, you can discern whether someone's behavior is about them or about you. You can hold boundaries without apology. You can recognize when someone's inconsistency is triggering your old wounds. And instead of spiraling, you can ground yourself in the present. That groundedness is deeply attractive because it communicates, I know who I am and I'm not afraid to. Be seen. That's what allows someone to truly choose you because they can see you. I think what we want deep down isn't just to be chosen, it's to be chosen for how we really are. And the only way that happens is if you're aware of the story you've been telling and you step outside of it long enough to show yourself radical self-awareness isn't just self-help jargon. It's the foundation for love that isn't contingent, isn't performance-based, and isn't haunted by ghosts of the past. It's messy and it's charred, but it's the only way to write a story that feels alive, not recycled. So the next time you catch yourself in that moment of hesitation on a date, in a conversation, in the quiet intimacy of your own thoughts, pause, ask yourself, what's the story here? And then gently, bravely decide if you want to keep it. Because every story you let go of creates space for a new one. And maybe that new one is the one where you stop waiting to be chosen and instead start choosing yourself over and over until the right person sees you and says, yes, that's who I want. So make we all say we want love, but if you listen to confidence, factor women notice recklessly, what many of us are actually chasing isn't love at all. It's an idealized version of love that does Texas. We think we're being discerning when really we're holding out for a fantasy. And fantasies feel intoxicating because they don't require us to risk anything. In a fantasy, nobody disappoints. Nobody leaves dishes in sink. Nobody forgets your birthday or zones out halfway through your story. In a fantasy, love is always passionate, always affirming, always convenient. But in real life, relationships are built from something far less glamorous and far more sustaining. Standards that are healthy, realistic, and rooted in values, not wish lists. The trouble is, we often confuse high standards with perfectionism. We think being selective means eliminating anyone who doesn't check every single box. A certain height, a certain career, a certain look, the right taste in music or books, the perfect ability to banter in text messages. And underneath that checklist is the idea that if we can just find the perfect match, then the relationship will be effortless. But effortless doesn't exist. If you're waiting for chemistry with no conflict, attraction with no compromise, passion with no vulnerability, you'll be waiting forever. Real intimacy requires friction. It requires disappointment. It requires working through the ordinary mess of two humans trying to love each other well. What we miss when we cling to unrealistic fantasies is that the things that actually make relationships work often look boring from the outside. Respect, kindness, reciprocity, emotional availability. These don't show up in glossy ways on the first date, the way good looks or witty jokes do. They show up over time in the way someone listens when you've had a terrible day, or how they show up for your family even when it's inconvenient, or how they handle conflict without making you feel small. But because we're chasing fireworks, we dismiss these qualities as not enough. We say he's nice, but or she's sweet, but as though nice and sweet were minor side notes instead of the bedrock of lasting love. I remember working with someone who always found reasons to end relationships within a few months. The spark would wear off and suddenly every little thing became a deal breaker. He didn't like the way she pronounced a certain word. She wasn't adventurous enough. She laughed too loudly. At first, it seemed like he just hadn't met the right person. But eventually, he admitted something deeper. If he allowed himself to accept someone's imperfections, it meant he would also have to face his own. His fantasy protected him from intimacy. As long as nobody was ever good enough, he didn't have to risk showing up fully, flaws and all. That's what fantasies do. They keep us safe, but they also keep you alone. Healthy standards, on the other hand, are about knowing the difference between essential values and surface preferences. Essential values are things like emotional availability, honesty, a sense of responsibility, kindness. They're the qualities that make someone reliable in life. Gets hard. Surface preferences are things like height, hobbies, sense of humor, or the way someone dresses. Preferences aren't bad. You're allowed to be attracted to what you're attracted to. But when preferences become barriers, when you dismiss someone who treats you with care because they don't fit the fantasy image in your head, you're prioritizing emotional depth versus surface-level charm fiction over reality. Here's the paradox. Luring your unrealistic fantasies isn't the same as settling People worry that if they stop chasing the perfect partner, they'll end up settling for less, but what looks like settling from the outside is often just choosing differently. You're not giving up on what matters. You're giving up on illusions that never mattered in the first place. Think about it. Would you rather have someone who looks perfect in photos but disappears when you need support? Or someone who shows up consistently, even if they don't fit your every imagined ideal? When you frame it that way, the choice becomes obvious. But letting go of fantasil means letting go of the stories you've told yourself about what love is supposed to feel like. If you grew up watching romantic comedies or scrolling through curated social media couples, you probably absorbed the idea that real love is constant excitement. The kind where you lock eyes across a crowded room or where every argument ends in passionate reconciliation. And when your relationship feels quieter, steadier, you might wonder if something's wrong. But the truth is, love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives like a steady flame, warm, reliable, sustaining. That's not boring. That's what allows you to build a life. Of course, part of why fantasies are so tempting is because they protect us from vulnerability. If you're waiting for the perfect person, you don't have to risk choosing someone imperfect and discovering they might hurt you. You get to stay on these side deadlines, safe in the idea that you're just holding out for more. But that safety is an illusion. In reality, vulnerability is the very thing that creates intimacy. When you allow yourself to connect with someone real, someone who might let you down, someone you might disappoint, you open the door to love that has depth and meaning. Fantasies can't give you that. Only real people can. This doesn't mean you ignore red flags or accept unhealthy behavior. Healthy standards protect you from that. If someone lies, disrespects you, avoids accountability, or undermines your sense of worth, that's not about letting go fantasies. That's about refusing harm. The distinction is important. Lowering unrealistic fantasies doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means clarifying them. It means knowing the difference between this person isn't tall enough and this person doesn't treat me with respect. One matters, the other doesn't. I think of love as a kind of mirror. It reflects not only who the other person is, but also what of you deserve. If you keep holding out for a fantasy, you might actually be protecting yourself from looking in that mirror. Because if you're waiting for perfect, you never have to confront your own imperfections. You never have to ask yourself whether you can tolerate the vulnerability of being loved by someone who sees the messy, unfiltered version of you. But that's the heart of it. Healthy standards ask, can this person meet me here in my realness? And can I meet them in theirs? So what does it look like to live this out? It looks like pausing before you dismiss someone for not fitting the picture in your head. It looks like asking, how do they make me feel? Instead of, do they match my list? It looks like recognizing that attraction deepens over time when it's rooted in respect and kindness. Even if it doesn't start with cinematic sparks, it looks like choosing someone who is willing to grow with you instead of someone who only dazzles you in the first act. And it also looks like doing your own work, because sometimes the fantasy isn't just about them, it's about you. Maybe the fantasy is that if you find the perfect partner, you won't have to confront your own insecurities, the secret to creating real connection or flaws. But real love will always shine a light on those places. That's part of its gift. It makes you grow healthy. Standards don't avoid that growth. They welcome it. So if you find yourself wondering why nobody feels good now, ask yourself this. Are my standards about values or about fantasies? Am I protecting myself from vulnerability by holding out for perfect? And if so, what would it mean to let someone choose me, not because it checked every box on their list, but because I showed up as myself and offered the same in return? Here's the truth. Love is not about finding the perfect person. It's about building something imperfect, but meaningful with someone who chooses you back. And that only happens when you drop the fantasy and hold on to the standards that matter. When you stop chasing illusions and start paying attention to the steady flame of real connection, because that flame, quiet, ordinary, sometimes inconvenient, is what will keep you warm long after the fireworks fade. We grow up learning that vulnerability is dangerous, that showing what hurts or admitting what we want will leave you succumb to rejection. From a young age, we pick up cues. Don't cry too loudly. Don't ask for too much. Don't let people see that you care more than they do. We learn to cover, to hide, to perform strength as if strength is the absence of feeling. But here's the paradox. The very thing we think protects us, armoring up, pretending not to need, ends up keeping us isolated. And the very thing we think will expose us, telling the truth, showing the cracks, is what allows people in. Vulnerability feels like weakness, but in reality, it's the deepest form of courage. I often see people who say they want intimacy, but who also avoid vulnerability at all costs. They want closeness, but they don't want to risk. They want connection, but they don't want exposure. And so they end up with relationships that look fine on the surface, pleasant, polite, functional, but lack the electricity of real intimacy, because intimacy doesn't come from perfection. It comes from letting someone see the parts of you you'd rather keep hidden. The messy parts, the scared parts, the parts that don't match the version of yourself you present to the world. There's a kind of relief when you finally stop pretending. When you're sitting across from someone and instead of nodding along or playing it cool, you say, actually, that hurt me. Or I really want this to work, or I feel scared right now. You think you're risking everything by saying it, but what you're really doing is creating the possibility for something authentic. Because the moment you speak the thing you're afraid to say, you find out whether the other person can meet you there. If they can, the bond deepens. If they can't, you gain clarity instead of wasting time in ambiguity. Vulnerability accelerates truth. But let's be honest, it's terrifying. We'll carry memories of times when we were vulnerable and got hurt. Maybe you opened up to someone and they just misread you. Maybe you admitted feelings and they didn't return them. Maybe you showed need and were met with judgment. Those experiences leave scars and they teach us that hiding is safer. So we develop strategies, humor, sarcasm. Busyness, independence to keep anyone from seeing how much we care. We tell ourselves we don't need anyone. We're fine on our own, we're chill, but that chill often masks loneliness. Vulnerability is not about spilling everything all at once or ignoring discernment. It's not about indiscriminately handing over your heart. It's about being honest first, how women test if you're genuine with yourself, and then with the people who earn your trust. It's saying this is what I want without disguising it as a joke. It's saying I was hurt by that without lashing out in anger. It's saying I love you not as a strategy but as a truth. And when you live that way, something shifts. You stop playing games. You stop trying to win. You start learning to connect. I once worked with someone who said they were tired of always being the one who cared more. Every relationship felt uneven. And they thought the solution was to care less. They said, if I can just stop being so vulnerable, I won't get hurt. But when we look closer, what they were really doing was protecting themselves from intimacy. They were treating love like a transaction, measuring who texted first, who reached out more, who revealed feelings first. It wasn't that they cared too much. It was that they didn't know how to care without also fearing abandon. Vulnerability for them looked like weakness, because it meant giving someone else the power to walk away. But the truth is the opposite is weakness. Pretending indifference leaves you at the mercy of someone else's willingness to guess what you feel. Vulnerability puts you back in your own power because you're living in truth rather than strategy. Think about the people in your life who you feel closest to. Chances are it's not because they're flawless. It's not because they never made mistakes or never needed you. It's because they let you in. They admit when they were scared. They asked for help. They told you when they felt insecure. And in those moments, you didn't love them less. You loved them more. Their vulnerability drew you closer. That's how human connection works. The cracks are what let the light in. Of course, vulnerability also requires boundaries. It doesn't mean yelling your story to anyone who asks. It doesn't mean you ignore red flags or tolerate unkindness. Healthy vulnerability is paired with discernment. You reveal gradually in layers, as trust is built. But if you never reveal at all, if you wait for certainty before you risk, you'll never get past the surface. Someone can only host you if they actually know you. And they can only know you if you let them see you. In dating, this plays out in obvious ways. People text casually for weeks, never saying what they really want. They avoid serious conversation space. They don't want to seem needy. They act aloof, thinking it will make them more attractive. And then they wonder why nothing feels real. The truth is, clarity is magnetic. Saying, I like you and I'd like to see where this goes, won't scare away the right person. It will filter out the wrong ones. Vulnerability doesn't repel, it refines us. But vulnerability isn't just about romance. It's about how we live in all our relationships with friends, with family, with ourselves. How often do we silence our needs because we're afraid they'll be too much? How often do we smile and say, I'm fine, when what we really mean is, I'm hurting? Every time we hide, we reinforce the story that our truth is unacceptable. And every time we risk honesty, we challenge that story. We teach ourselves that our needs can be voiced, and sometimes, even often, they'll be met. What makes vulnerability strength is not the guarantee of a good outcome. It's the willingness to face whatever outcome arises. When you say, this is how I feel, you're brave. Not because you know the other person will respond well, but because you're strong enough to handle it if they don't. That's real resilience, not avoiding hurt, but trusting yourself to recover if hurt happens. And ironically, that the mindset that makes her choose you confidence, the willingness to show up regardless of the response, is what makes you most attractive, most trustworthy, most real. The biggest misconception is that vulnerability is a on-time leap, like jumping off a cliff. In reality, it's a daily practice. It's the micro moments, admitting you don't know something, apologizing when you're wrong, saying thank you, saying I miss you, saying I need you. It's letting Simeon see your disappointment instead of brushing it off. It's asking for reassurance without shame. These small acts accumulate into trust. And trust is what makes love durable. Here's the thing. We can't choose whether to be vulnerable. We already are. Just by existing, by caring, by loving, we risk loss. Pretending otherwise doesn't eraseth risk. It just erases the connection. So the choice isn't whether to be vulnerable, but whether to do it consciously, whether to use it as a bridge instead of a wall, whether to let it deepen our relationships instead of denying it and staying alone in our armor. When you think about the relationships you want, the kind where Simeon really sees you, really chooses you, really knows you, remember this, that kind of love requires fallibility. It requires you to drop the performance and let yourself be known, not polished, not invulnerable, not perfect, known. And if you're still afraid, that's okay. Fear means you're on the edge of something real. Fear means you're about to step out of the script and into your life. So the next time you want to hide behind humor, behind silence, behind self-sufficiency, pause, ask yourself what you're afraid of revealing. Ask yourself what story you're telling about why that truth makes you unlovable. And then, if you're brave enough, share it with someone who has shown they can hold it. That moment, trembling and unsteady as it feels, is the doorway to the connection you've been craving. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the strongest move you can make. Most people think of love as something that just happens, like weather. You meet someone, you feel aspart, you fall in, and the rest takes care of itself. But if you've ever actually been in a real relationship, that's not how it works. The spark is the easy part. The hard part, the meaningful part, is what comes after. And one of the things that determines whether a relationship lasts isn't how strong the spark was, but how deeply both people participate in it. Because love isn't a solo performance, it's a duet. Without reciprocity and mutual agency, it becomes lopsided. And lopsided love always breaks. Reciprocity doesn't mean keeping score or measuring who called first or splitting the dinner bill exactly down the middle. It means both people investing, both people showing up, both people carrying the weight of choosing each other. Too often, I hear stories about people who feel like they're doing all the emotional labor. They initiate the conversations, they plan the dates, they bring up the hard topics. Meanwhile, the other person coasts along, comfortable with semblance. At first, it might even feel flattering being the caretaker, the pursuer, the one who makes things happen. But over time, it creates resentment because love without reciprocity feels like begging, and nobody wants to beg for affection. Mutual agency is about choice. It's about recognizing that both people in the relationship get to decide. Too many people slip into dynamics where one person holds all the power and the other waits anxiously to be chosen, to be validated, to be reassured. But love doesn't thrive under those conditions. A healthy relationship requires two people actively choosing. Not just once, not just at the beginning, but continuously every day in small ways. You're saying, I choose to be here. I choose to engage. I choose to work through this with you. When that choice is one-sided, the relationship becomes fragile. There's a cultural myth that if avoiding the competition trap, you work hard enough, you can make someone love you. That if you say the right words, wear the right clothes, hold back just enough vulnerability, or give just enough, you can tilt the scales in your favor. But that belief strips away your agency. It turns you into a performer on someone else's stage. Real love doesn't come from convincing someone. It comes from reciprocity, from their willingness to meet you halfway. And if they can't, no amount of effort on your part will sustain it. The irony is that the moment you stop over-functioning, stop. Doing the heavy lifting for both people is the moment you find out the truth. If the relationship collapses when you stop pushing, it wasn't a relationship to begin with. It was you carrying the illusion of one. That collapse might feel painful, but it's also freeing. It creates space for a relationship where you're not performing or propping up, but participating. When reciprocity is present, it changes everything. It makes difficult conversations possible because you know you're not the only one trying to repair. It makes intimacy deeper because you don't feel like you're risking more than the other person. It makes ordinary life richer because you're both invested in building it. Imagine two people pushing a car up a hill. If only one person is pushing, eventually they'll collapse from exhaustion. But if both people are pushing, even if the hill is steep, the weight feels manageable. That's what reciprocity feels like. It doesn't remove the struggle, but it makes it bearable. Mutual agency also means recognizing your own role in choosing. Too often, people treat relationships as though the other person holds all the power. They wait by the phone, obsess over every text, twist themselves into knots to be more desirable. But in doing so, they forget that they're also deciding. They forget to ask, Do I want this person? Do they align with my values? Do they treat me well? Do I feel safe here? Mutual agency means remembering that your choice matters too, that you're not auditioning, you're partnering. This is especially important when you find yourself clinging to someone who isn't giving back. Maybe you've convinced yourself that if you just try harder, they'll change. But the truth is, you can't build reciprocity alone. If someone isn't choosing you freely, your effort won't manufacture that choice. And if you keep pouring into a relationship, that isn't mutual. You're teaching yourself that one-sided love is acceptable. Over time, that erodes your sense of worth. What does it look like then to cultivate reciprocity and mutual agency in real life? It looks like being intentional about giving and receiving. It looks like noticing when you're overextending, pulling back to allow space for the other person to step forward. It looks like speaking up when you feel imbalance, not with accusation, but with honesty. I feel like I'm the one always reaching out. Can we talk about that? It looks like choosing not to chase someone who repeatedly shows you they won't meet you halfway. And it looks like celebrating the relationships where both people are consistently investing because those are the ones that have staying power. It also requires a willingness to tolerate discomfort. Sometimes when you stop overfunctioning, silence follows. You stop initiating and the other person doesn't step up. That silence is painful, but it's also clarifying. It tells you where you actually stand. Reciprocity means you're not afraid to let the silence reveal the truth. Because the truth, even when it's disappointing, is always better than the limbo of carrying a relationship alone. One of the hardest lessons is that the one trait she can't ignore, reciprocity can't be negotiated into existence. You can't logic someone into showing up. You can't beg someone into choosing you. You can invite, you can express, you can model, but at the end of the day, their choice is theirs. And your choice, your agency is in deciding what you do with that. Reality, do you accept crumbs and call it a feast? Or do you hold out for the kind of relationship where both people bring something to the table? Here's the beautiful thing. When you find reciprocity, you feel it. There's an ease even in the hard moments. You don't wonder if you're too much, or if you're asking for the impossible because the other person is also invested in making it work. You don't walk on eggshells waiting to see if you'll be abandoned because they're choosing you with the same intentionality that you're choosing them. That mutuality creates a foundation of safety. And from that safety, love can grow in ways that one-sided dynamics never allow. And it doesn't mean the relationship is perfectly balanced at all times. There will be seasons when one person carries more. The partner who takes care of the other during an illness or who holds space during a period of stress. Reciprocity isn't about perfect equality at every moment. It's about the assurance that the balance will shift back, that the giving will flow in both directions over time. That's what makes it sustainable. Without that assurance, giving turns into depletion. With it, giving becomes love in action. So if you're in a relationship where you feel like you're always auditioning, always waiting, always trying harder, pause. Ask yourself, where is the reciprocity? Where is the mutual agency? Am I choosing or am I just waiting to be chosen? The answers might sting, but they'll also set you free. Because the moment you claim your agency, you stop settling for lopsided love. You stop pouring energy into people who can't or won't meet you. You start saving that energy for relationships where both people push the car, both people choose, both people invest. Love isn't about convincing. It isn't about rescuing. It isn't about waiting passively to be picked. It's about reciprocity. Two people stepping toward each other. It's about agency. Two people choosing again and again. That's what turns infatuation to a partnership. That's what transforms spark into stability. That's what makes love feel not just thrilling, but safe, alive, and enduring. And here's the truth you need to remember. You deserve that kind of love. Not because you've earned it, not because you're flawless, but because that's what love is supposed to be. If it's not reciprocal, if it's not mutual, it's not love. It's performance. And you don't need to spend your life on someone else's stage. You used to have a relationship where you were both audience and actor, both giver and receiver, both chooser and chosen. That's not weakness. That's not asking for too much. That's the very definition of love done well. Thought I'll leave you with this. You're not trying to make her choose you. You're trying to be the kind of person someone would want to choose. That means doing your work, speaking your truth, clarifying your values, and offering her your unfiltered self, not a highlight. Real. Because when you do that, and when someone truly sees you, the choice becomes natural. And that's not about winning, it's about connection. So let her choose, and choose her whenever that is for all of who she is, not for your idea of her. That's how you create something real. Not coerced, not convinced, just chosen.